Welcome to all. Welcome for those who are attending here in person in the auditorium of the new headquarters of the OIV, the Hotel Bouchu di Lesterno. And welcome to all the people attending online from all around the world. It's an honor and it's a great pleasure to have you all with us today for this historic celebration. Today, on the 29th of November, it has been 100 years that the OIV exists. So 100 years ago, the OIV is signing the treaty, the founding treaty. So we are gathered today for a series of events. We will have 3 key moments: a focus on data, presented by the OIV Director General, John Barker. We will have a declaration of the International Day of Vine and Wine, and the presentation of the International Network of Vine and Wine Cities by the OIV President Yvette van der Merwe. And we'll have a third moment, a ceremony of awards. A reminder, so all the speeches will be translated into several languages. For our on-site attendees, participants will see only the transcription. So I'll show you. You will only see the transcription. This is on the OIV app. If you want to connect to internet, you have the Wi-Fi codes, and it's all on the OIV official application. For those who are following online, they will be able to see the video, what's happening in the room, and the transcription. If you want to change at any time your attendance because you have not the right setting, you go on your profile and you can change attending virtually or in person. Additionally, the PowerPoint presentation will be briefly available on the OIV app. If you want to follow from your desktop and with the presentation open for more details on the figures, you're welcome to do so. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Daniela Costa, OIV Press Officer, who will guide us through the first part of today's program. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Hello to the present here with us today, and also to those who are online following us. We are now starting the first series of conferences. This series is going to have 3 different parts. We're having our Director General presenting an overview of 100 years data first, then the first estimates on wine production for 2024 by our Head of Statistics Department, Giorgio Delgrosso. After that, we will have a session of questions and answers, so journalists can already submit their questions on the chat on our OIV application. And this will be ended with the presentation of our new OIV strategic plan by our Director General, John Barker. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Barker.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this very special press conference on this very significant date, the 100th anniversary of the OIV. It's a great pleasure to see so many of our OIV families. I'm very delighted that we're joined today by our new president, Mrs. Yvette van der Merwe, in her first official engagement, and also our Vice President, Luigi Moio. And I would also like to extend a special welcome to Minister Councillor Chen Li from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China. We're delighted to report that the membership application of China was formally accepted by the member states of the OIV on 14 November 2024. So we warmly welcome Mr. Chen and China. Today we will present our usual report on wine production estimates for the coming year, but first I have a special presentation. the results of our project to bring together the key global statistics for the vine and wine sector over the past 100 years. Earlier this year, I asked our OIV statistics team, together with the OIV statistics expert group, to develop a comprehensive report covering 100 years of data on the wine and vine sector to celebrate the OIV's centenary. This is an amazing project full of rich insights that will help give members and the sector valuable perspectives and insights, not only on the path to today, but on the road ahead. What I'm showing today are preliminary results. We will publish the final data in 2025, and there may be further refinements, but the main trends and insights that we share today won't change. Today we're focusing mainly on wine, so let's go on a journey and see what has changed in the wine sector during the 100 years of the OIV's existence. And what we will see is a sector that has undergone a series of profound transformations over the past century. From a sector largely concentrated within Europe and its colonies in the 1920s and 1930s, through the devastation of World War II, to the post-war boom in production and consumption, to a period of retrenchment in the 70s and 80s, and the progressive stabilization and internationalization of global wine production and consumption in recent decades. The story that emerges is of a sector that is resilient, that has adapted and even increased its value despite the changes and challenges that it has faced. So let's begin. So we're just waiting to address a small technical hitch, but we're going to start by looking at the global vineyard surface area. And we're talking about the area planted in grapes for all uses, wine and other beverages, table grapes and raisins, and it's all planted vines, whether they're in production or not. We're using a color coding, so we will present the world total in black and a breakdown by continent in different colors. Red for Africa, green for Asia, which includes the former Soviet Socialist republics on the Asian side of the Caucasus, blue for Europe, green for North America, orange for South America, purple for Oceania, and we use these colors consistently across the slides. So here's the first graph, vineyard surface area. And the first thing that we can see is the black curve, which represents the global total, that's the world. And we can see this curve, a steady increase in the years following the Second World War, followed by a retrenchment and then a more stable plateau. And we can see also that it largely mirrors the blue curve for Europe, which indicates the important position that Europe holds in grape and wine production. And you'll see this basic curve of the rise and then the stabilization in much of the data that I'll show today. Looking in a little more depth, we can identify distinct phases in the evolution of the global vineyard surface area. In the period leading up to the Second World War, the world vineyard was growing at a reasonably steady rate of 1% per year on average, mainly Europe, but also grape and raisin production in Turkey and wine production in Algeria. As you would expect, there was a decline during the Second World War, but the post-war period saw a boom in vineyard planting, mostly, but not entirely, driven by an increase in wine production within Europe. The vineyard area peaked in 1978, exceeding 10 million hectares, nearly 3 million hectares more than its current size. In the 1980s and 1990s, the world vineyard area declined, particularly in Europe, where agricultural policies incentivized the conversion of vineyards to other crops. The result was a 30% reduction in European vineyards and a 25% decrease globally in just 2 decades. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we come to production. The rate of decline slowed considerably in 2000s, with the average annual decrease of just 0.3%. This reflects contrasting trends. Europe continues to decrease by around 1% per year, while non-EU countries increased their wine production levels, and Asia has seen a lot of growth, notably in table grape production, but also more recently in wine. Now let's turn our focus to wine production. Once again, we see the world total indicated in black, with 6 continents represented in 6 colours. In the early decades of the 20th century, global wine production was dominated by Europe, particularly France, Italy, and Spain. And again, as you can see, as you would expect, World War II significantly disrupted wine production. But the years that follow saw a remarkable surge in production. So what's behind this? Certainly, there was an increase in vineyard surface for wine production. And we note particularly the growth of production in Algeria, which was mainly supplying France. But more importantly, there's a remarkable increase in productivity due to technological developments, the increased use of phytosanitary products, changes in vineyard management systems, etc. And consumption is also increasing at the same time because this is an era of comparative prosperity, which sees the expansion of middle classes in many countries. Peak wine production occurred in 1978, with more than 380 million hectolitres being produced. But by this time, production is spiking at levels significantly higher than consumption, and there's a lot of talk about wine lakes within the European Economic Community during these years. From this peak, we see a fairly rapid decline in production between the early 80s and the mid-90s. There are several reasons for this. First, the implementation of the Common Market Organisation policies in Europe, both grubbing up vineyards, but also the progressive introduction of appellations of origin with more strict limits on the yield. We will also see the decline of the vineyard area of Algeria after independence, and also the anti-alcoholism policies initiated by USSR President Gorbachev, which precipitated a decline in production in many Soviet socialist republics. Production starts to stabilize again, relatively speaking, in the mid-1990s, but it does so at a level higher than pre-World War II, because now we start to see countries outside Europe coming into significant production. In recent decades, production has remained within a comparatively stable band of between 250 and 300 million hectolitres. That is until 2023 and 2024, where production has fallen reasonably significantly below 250 million hectolitres. So let's look at the emergence of countries outside Europe in a little more detail. In red, we see Africa, which until the 1970s, it's mostly Algeria making wine for export to France. After independence, this trade tapers off, and South Africa becomes the major contributor to production in the African continent. South America, in orange, is producing high quantities, mostly for domestic markets. And then there's a bit of a transition in the early 1990s as production pivots towards higher quality and towards export markets. North America, in yellow, this is largely the USA, which takes quite a few decades to rise from the ashes of prohibition, which was 1933, but growth steps up in the 1960s and the 1970s. And it continues to grow. A little later, you have Australia and then New Zealand step up their production, so that by the 2000s, the so-called New World has become a significant force in world wine production. In Asia, well, this is mostly production in former Soviet socialist republics on the Asian side of the Caucasus, which is declining from the early 1980s. But then we see Asia joined by China which emerges as a producer in the 2000s. In recent years, production in Asia has dropped back. This is in part due to COVID and post-COVID impacts within China. Now, this next graph is about volatility, and it offers a fascinating perspective. From the previous slides, we can see that wine production fluctuates, sometimes quite dramatically, from year to year. We call this volatility. Volatility is a feature of wine production. As a perennial agricultural crop, wine is subject to seasonal fluctuations. And we should also recognise that wine production is subject to policy interventions that can impact on production to a greater or lesser extent as well. So what we've tried to capture in this graph is an indication of volatility in wine production volumes over time, whether it's up or down. So the jagged blue line represents the percentage of change from one year to another. And you can see that a change in volume of as much as 30% from one year to another is not unheard of. But we haven't seen that since the 1960s. The really interesting line is the smooth red line, the red dots. These show the 100-year trend. And with this 100-year trend, we can observe a number of things. Between the 1920s and the 1950s, the volatility of production volumes was high. This period reflects the challenges of less advanced agricultural practices and the broader instability of the area. From the 1960s onward, volatility gradually decreased, particularly from the 1980s. Why? There are a number of reasons. There's a reduction in vineyard area where more marginal vineyards are abandoned, leading to more consistent overall production. The geographical diversification of production has also tended to balance climate impacts. Additionally, we have the progressive introduction of crop management techniques, phytosanitary products, fertilizers, clonal selection, advances in vineyard management, and these all contribute to this greater stabilization. But if we look at the last 15 years or so, volatility gradually starts to increase again. There are a number of factors involved in this, but we can attribute the major part of this volatility to significant and unpredictable weather events affecting both hemispheres. Let's move now to look at wine production. And this is a key topic at the moment, with many people talking at the moment about deconsumption. If we look at the curve for world wine consumption by volume, it echoes the basic shape of wine production. But we can see that the curve is far more smooth because consumption changes more gradually. We don't have the peaks and troughs caused by weather conditions that we have for wine production. In the early 20th century, wine consumption was, at least in volume terms, primarily concentrated in Europe, with countries like France, Italy, Spain, and Germany leading due to the deep cultural integration of wine into daily life. And you can see, again, how closely the blue line, Europe, follows the world total. Consumption within Europe grows strongly in the post-war period as economic recovery promotes a resurgence in European wine culture. Wine consumption begins to become more global and more accessible to growing middle classes during this period as well. We see here first South America and then North America start to become major wine consumers. And clearly this growth is associated to a large degree with social change and economic change in those places. Both European and world wine consumption peak in the 1970s and early 1980s, roughly the same time as wine production peaks. We have peak wine consumption in 1983, almost 300 million hectolitres. But if we recall, wine production peaks at 380 million hectolitres. So that's why we have this talk about wine lakes around that time. In the early 1980s, you see the significant fall in global wine consumption, which echoes the fall in production. In 10 years, from the beginning of the 1980s to the beginning of the 1990s, the world market shrunk by almost 25%. This is mainly a fall in Europe and the USSR, because in other regions, consumption is still growing. Some of the causes for this fall in consumption are the same as the fall in production that I mentioned earlier. For example, USSR anti-alcoholism policies, but clearly there are social and policy changes going on in the background, particularly within Europe at the same time. Since then, global wine consumption has stabilized between 220 and 250 million hectolitres. From the early 2000s, the gap between European and global consumption widens as consumption in Europe continues to decrease, albeit at a slower rate than before, while consumption in North America and Asia grows. But let's not forget that Europe remains the biggest consuming region by a wide margin. In the last few years, we've seen consumption drop in North America in yellow and Asia in green as well, as global consumption has reached the lowest level since 1996. This is in a large part due to inflation and trade disruptions, but we're also seeing underlying longer-term shifts in consumer behaviours. However, we should keep in mind that wine consumption is now highly globally diversified. It's enjoyed in 194 countries, and consumption still remains within the range that we've seen for the last 30 years. So let's look in a little bit more detail at the emergence of wine consumption outside Europe. You can see consumption in South America, which is the orange line, grows steadily from the 1930s, mainly due to the expansion of the domestic market, particularly in Argentina, but it starts to decline from the early 1980s. And what's really interesting is that South America is the only non-European continent whose consumption curve echoes that of Europe. Wine consumption in North America, the yellow line, starts from more or less zero in 1933. Well, we can say legal wine consumption because 1933 is when prohibition ends. It grows steadily until the 1960s when we see a marked increase. And we know that this is in part due to the growth of the middle classes, in part due to the emergence of California and later other US wine regions, and we can think of signifiers like the Judgment of Paris wine tasting and the French paradox. Africa in red is fairly consistent, but actually what's behind this is a decline in consumption in North Africa being replaced by consumption in South Africa. In Asia, which is the green line, the evolution of wine consumption can be divided into two distinct phases. Until the 1960s, consumption was primarily concentrated in the Asian Soviet Socialist republics. From the 1960s onward, we see a progressive increase in consumption in China and Japan. And then in recent years, a drop in consumption, which is in part due to weakening demand in Asia and particularly China. Finally, Oceania in purple starts to change its consumption patterns very gradually in the 1950s and 1960s, and then more rapidly as Australia and New Zealand become more open to the world and diversify from beer consumption as well. And one of the interesting things is all of these growing consumer countries are growing their production at the same time. This last slide just shows a really interesting observation on the relative contributions of different regions to global wine consumption over time. We have here 3 10-year snapshots. And what you can see is that Europe in blue was once dominant with a share of 90% during the 20s and 30s. Now it accounts for 60% of global wine consumption. But remember that the pie has got bigger. So European consumption now is still significantly higher than it was a century ago in pure volume terms. South America in orange doubled its market share in the first half of the 20th century, but it has slipped back more recently, mainly due to the decline in Argentina's consumption. North America in yellow has shown remarkable growth. The region expanded from 0.3% to 6.9%, and then 16.8% of the market. And the USA in particular stands out as the leading market worldwide, both in volume and value. Asia and Oceania, green and purple respectively. In the 1920s, these regions were just 0.3% and 0.2% of global production. A century later, they have emerged as significant markets, with Asia now holding a 10% share and Oceania at 3%. Now we'll talk about international trade. The data on international wine exports tells a remarkable story of growth and of the internationalization of the wine trade and consumption. This transformation has been shaped by technological advancements, evolving trade policies, and a progressive globalization of consumer preferences. In the decades leading up to World War II, trade in wine was predominantly intra-continental, constrained by high tariffs and limited transportation technology, and dominated by France, Italy, and Spain. Exports were largely directed within Europe and between continental markets. The disruptions of World War II decimated trade routes, but the post-war era ushered in gradual trade liberalisation. The establishment of a rules-based trading system through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade played a crucial role in facilitating international commerce. In the 1990s, wine exports accelerate. This is the era of global consensus around trade rules reflected in the WTO agreements, and we see more free trade agreements as well as an improvement in shipping technologies for wine. And so as a consequence, we see the emergence of exporters from outside Europe alongside the expansion of markets, particularly the United Kingdom, which is a really major importer, United States, Canada, Japan, and more recently China. And you can see that Europe, the blue line, is both historically and today the dominant force in world wine exports. And you can see again how closely the Europe line mirrors the world line. But a large proportion of this is intra-EU trade. Still, the largest European exporters are also in leading positions in most of the world's other major markets. In this slide, we zoom in on the export performance of countries outside Europe, and you can clearly see some major movements. First, in red, we can see the very significant role of North Africa, mainly Algeria and to a lesser extent Morocco, as a supplier to France during much of the 20th century. At their peak, these exports are significantly higher than any single non-European exporter today, and they continue strongly until independence and then the advent of the Common Market Organisation for Wine, after which they fall away. Then we see this trough in the 1970s and 80s until we reach the point where producers outside Europe emerge as an exporting force in the 1990s. These countries have been growing their production for decades, but it's at this point when they start to export. And for many of these countries, exports rather than domestic consumption will eventually become the main driver of production growth. Finally, we're just going to look at these donut graphs, which give 3 time samples that illustrate the transition of wine exports over the century. So in the decade from 24 to 33, we can see that trade within Europe and between France and Algeria dominates the export figures. Between 1974 and 1983, imports from North Africa are falling away and non-European exporters have not yet emerged. So European exporters have the field to themselves, but remember that a lot of this is trade within Europe itself. Jump ahead to the period 2014 to 2023, and we see a far more international export picture. The emergence of South America and Oceania as exporters is particularly notable. Europe's relative share of total exports falls from nearly 90% to roughly 70%, but remember again, the pie is getting bigger, so European exports have in fact continued to grow as the global market has grown. So, thinking about international trade, here we have a graph that indicates the degree of globalization in the world wine market. Essentially, this represents the proportion of wine that's consumed outside the country of origin. And you can see until the late 1960s, the index is reasonably stable, around 10%. But starting in the 1970s, we see this very impressive growth, increasing by nearly 1 percentage point per year on average. This upward trend has continued and reached a peak in recent years of 48%. You can see in the last couple of years a small dip, which is really the result of a number of factors, including the aftermath of COVID, disruption of global trade routes and inflation, and a dip in consumption. But I think the point here is that international trade is now integral to the global wine sector. So, to conclude, here's all of that data on a single slide, and we can clearly see the extraordinary trajectory from the post-war years and the devastation of World War II, from the pre-war years, sorry, and the devastation of World War II, to the post-war boom, to the retrenchment of the 70s and 80s, and then the progressive stabilisation and internationalisation of wine production and consumption. There's a lot to learn from this data, and we're going to continue to explore it in the coming months. But for now, I just want to draw out a few observations that I hope can inform our understanding of the present and future of the wine sector. The first observation is that change is a constant. The global wine sector has undergone significant transformations in production methods, market structures, geographies, and consumption patterns over the last 100 years. On balance, these have been positive in terms of the value and the reach of the sector. My second observation is that the wine sector is highly resilient. It has weathered depression, prohibition, world wars, the oil crisis of the 70s, the stock market crash of the 80s, the global financial crisis of the 2000s, COVID, etc., etc. It has survived and it has grown in value. Third, it is essential to recognise that science and learning have made a huge difference. Scientific and technical research, improvements and innovations, the development and sharing of knowledge across the global sector have made an enormous impact on everything from product quality, yield management, sustainability. All of these things are at the heart of the OIV's mission, and these things that we will continue to promote. Fourth, production and consumption are always evolving. There's a never-ending waltz by which production adapts to consumption and consumption responds to production over time. So the observation that production is very rarely aligned with consumption, it's really a fact of life for the wine sector. Fifth, the impacts of climate change are accumulating, and this can clearly be seen in the rising volatility of production volumes. Addressing climate change and sustainability are crucial to the future of the sector. Sixth, international trade is integral to the wine sector. It has opened up new markets and consumer preferences, creating exciting opportunities. At the same time, the sector is vulnerable to geopolitical and economic uncertainties that are often beyond our control. To conclude, we reflect on the fact that the wine sector is a long-term sector. It is essential to have a long-term view. This is undoubtedly a tough moment right now for many in the wine sector, but it's a moment of change and therefore uncertainty. We should look at the resilience, the adaptability, the quality, and the global reach of the sector with optimism. The key challenges: addressing sustainability and climate change, understanding shifting consumer behaviours and the position of wine in society, navigating global trade uncertainty. They're also the opportunities for wine. The OIV has a role to play in each of these areas, and I will come back to our new strategic plan at the end of today's press conference. Finally, I just want to conclude by expressing my gratitude to all those who've contributed to this project, our member states who diligently responded to our questionnaires, our two key contributors to this effort, Mr. Patrick Egren, President of our StatCo group of experts, and Mrs. Christine Mouillet from France Agrimaire, who have consistently supported us across various statistical projects. And of course, our in-house statistics team, Giorgio Delgrosso, head of our statistics department, and Yue Chang, our data officer. Thank you for your great work, everybody.
Thank you, Director General. I would like to remind journalists that they can submit their questions on the chat of our application. And at the session of questions and answers, we were going to transmit their questions. Another warning for those who are present in the room, just as we said before, pay attention to the steps because they are really small. Please don't fall. And now, let's welcome Giorgio Delgrosso with his first estimates for the wine production in 2024.
Thanks and good afternoon, everyone. So, as always, at this time of the year, we present the first estimates for global wine production. These preliminary figures provide an early indication of production trends and help outline the context in which the wine industry is operating. So our goal today is to provide a clear and concise overview of these estimates while addressing the key factors influencing the numbers and their implications for the sector. Now, before we begin, let me just remind you of two important points. First, the figures I will present today focus on wine production and exclude musts and juices. And second, these numbers, particularly for the Northern Hemisphere, are very preliminary estimates based on harvest reports. Therefore, they are subject to revision over the coming months. So today I'll take you through the data following a chronological order. We'll start with the Southern Hemisphere, where harvests take place in the first semester of the year, and then shift to the Northern Hemisphere and finally conclude with the world wine production estimate for this year, 2024. So let's begin with the Southern Hemisphere, where, as I said, harvests concluded in April-May. At this stage, production figures tend to be relatively accurate. Wine production in the Southern Hemisphere is estimated at 46 million hectoliters for 2024, a 2% drop from last year. This is also 12% below the last 5-year average, making it the lowest output in the last 20 years. This historically low production is due to significant climatic challenges across nearly all major producing countries. Despite this decline, the region maintains its share of about 20% of global production, consistent with recent trends. Let me take you through some key highlights on major countries. In the upper part of the slide, you can see the recent evolution of production volumes by country, while in the lower part of the slide, you can see the percentage variations. In dark blue is the change with respect to 2023, and in light blue, the change with respect to the last 5-year average. Argentina leads the Southern Hemisphere this year with production forecast at 10.9 million hectoliters. That's a strong recovery, 23% higher than last year, though still slightly below average. In the second place, we found Australia. Production there is estimated at 10.2 million hectoliters, up 5% from last year, but 16% below average. Excessive rainfall and inventory pressures remain key issues. Chile, in the third place, has seen a sharp decline with production down 15% to 9.3 million hectoliters, reflecting the effects of a cool spring and drought conditions. In South Africa, extreme weather has taken its toll. Production is projected at 8.8 million hectoliters, a 5% drop from last year, impacted by severe flooding and high disease pressure in several wine regions. New Zealand at 2.8 million hectoliters and Brazil at 2.7 have also seen declines, with production in both countries significantly affected by unfavorable weather, including frost and heavy spring rains. Now let's turn our attention to the Northern Hemisphere. Here, harvest data is still relatively fresh, with much of it only finalized in the last couple of months. Starting with the European Union, 2024 production is estimated at 139 million hectoliters. This is a 3% decrease compared to 2023 and 11% below the last 5-year average. If confirmed, it would mark the lowest production level of this century, even lower than 2017. Adverse climatic conditions played a major role here, with droughts, heavy rains, and storms affecting vineyards across the region. Let's now see more in detail the data at the country level. So this year, Italy has reclaimed its position as the largest producer in the European Union and at the world level, with an estimated 41 million hectoliters. This represents a 7% increase from last year, but remains 13% below its last 5-year average. Northern Italy, in particular, was hit hard by hailstorms. In France, production has dropped significantly, with a forecast of 36.9 million hectoliters. This is 23% lower than in 2023, and marks the lowest level since 2017, where production was at 36.6. The decline is linked to adverse weather throughout the whole growing season, including continuous rain, disease outbreaks, and droughts in many key wine regions. Spain, meanwhile, is expected to produce 33.6 million hectoliters, an 18% increase from last year, but still slightly below average. Positive harvests in Castilla-La Mancha and Extremadura contributed to this recovery, although ongoing water stress remains a concern. Other large countries within the European Union, here we have countries with production volumes above 1 million hectoliter, present a mixed picture. On the one side, we have countries like Hungary expecting a very strong year, with production up 22% from 2023, reaching its highest level since 2010. Greece, with 1.4 million hectoliters, has also increased its production with respect to last year, even though the expected levels are still below average, as you can see from the graph. In contrast, Germany at 8.1 million hectoliters, Portugal 6.9, Romania 3.7, and Austria at 2.2 million hectoliters are all seeing declines due to spring frosts, heavy rains, and droughts. These countries, apart from Portugal, expect all production volumes below average. I conclude the overview of the European Union with the group of countries with a production volume below 1 million hectoliters. In this case, we see positive variations with respect to 2023 in Slovenia, Croatia, and Slovakia. Negative variations compared to last year were recorded in Bulgaria, projected to be 17% below its 5-year average, and in Czechia, which anticipates very significant decreases in wine production in 2024 due to droughts and spring frosts. Outside the European Union, but still in the Northern Hemisphere, the picture is quite heterogeneous. The USA, the fourth largest wine producer globally, is forecasted to produce 23.6 million hectoliters, down 3% from last year, but overall in line with its average production volumes observed in recent years. Russia is showing modest growth, with production estimated at 4.7 million hectoliters, 4% above average. As for China, like every year, data on wine grape harvest for 2024 is not available yet. Updated figures for the year will be released in the first semester of 2025. Georgia is a standout performer, with production expected to reach 2.4 million hectoliters, its highest since the turn of the century, thanks to very favorable weather. Moldova, meanwhile, is forecasting a 16% decline, but remains well above average. I conclude with Switzerland. Wine production is projected at 0.8 million hectoliters for 2024, marking a 20% decline compared to last year and 9% below the 5-year average. The harvest volume has been mainly impacted by unpredictable weather and downy mildew. Now we move to the much-awaited world wine production estimate for the year 2024. So, based on the information collected on 29 countries representing about 85% of global production, for 2024, world wine production volume is forecast between 227 and 235 million hectoliters, with a mid-range estimate at 231 million hectoliters. This would represent a 2% drop from the already historically low 2023 and a 13% decline compared to the last 10-year average. As you can see from the graph, a drop in world wine production for a second consecutive year is significant. To find a smaller vintage than 2024, we must go back to 1961. The reasons seem quite clear. Climate variability with frosts, heavy rains and droughts has severely impacted productivity of the world vineyard. Overall, these trends highlight the growing impact of changing environmental conditions to the wine sector, underscoring the urgent need for adaptive strategies and resilient viticultural practices. At the same time, reduced production in the current economic context may help improve the supply-demand balance in some regions. Talking about demand side, I would like to conclude on a more positive note. Of course, with the information available at this point of the year, it is still too early to reach any type of conclusion. However, first observations suggest relatively positive trends for the first half of 2024. In the first 7 months of the year, global wine trade recorded a 2% increase in volume and a 2% decline in value, reflecting potentially rising demand and reduced inflationary pressures, which could support consumer spending and reduce producers' costs. At the same time, inventories in some key wine-producing and consuming countries, like Italy and Spain, showed significant year-over-year declines by the end of July 2024. This is, of course, a consequence of the small 2023 vintage, but it could also suggest a better alignment between supply and demand in certain countries. Now, before concluding, let me remind you once again that the figure I just showed for 2024 must be taken with caution, as these are very preliminary estimates. Also, the high volatility in production volumes observed over the last years at both country and regional levels makes the estimating and forecasting exercise more and more difficult. So, for this reason, in the coming months, we'll refine these estimates and continue monitoring trade, consumption, and inventory trends to gain deeper insights into the state of the sector. And as always, we will share this information at our next press conference in April 2025. So my presentation ends here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Giorgio. We are now opening the floor for questions. We have around 10 minutes for a question of time. We're giving the priority to media, to journalists that are present, and also for those submitting their questions on the chat. If you want to ask a question, you just need to push the button in front of your seat and ask the question in the microphone. I kindly ask you to identify yourselves and the media you're representing. So the floor is yours.
Hello, Per Karlsson, BK Wine Magazine and Forbes.com. We've seen a dramatic decline in production. At the same time, we see dramatic imbalances between production and consumption. We talk about 30,000 hectares uprooted in France, American producers who can't sell their grapes, so they leave them on the ground. So there is a structural problem in some way in the wine industry. Do you see this as something which is particular for some countries, or is it something that it is general for the whole sector worldwide?
Thank you, Per, for your question. I think we see with the last 2 vintages of very small production, it's a little bit difficult to estimate, because with production there's always an amount that is used for industrial uses, about 30 million litres, but we can say that certainly 2003 and 2004, we're starting to see consumption and production much more closely in alignment. And so I think, it's not necessarily good that we have low production, but I guess if there's a silver lining, it does start to bring those 2 things more into alignment. I think what you're seeing in certain places around the world might be and I couldn't comment on specific examples, but I would say it might be to do just with changing preferences, because, for example, we know that while preference for red wine is declining, white, sparkling, and rosé wine still reasonably resilient in the current global market.
Thank you. Questions are coming in from the chat. So we have here this one. Do you think this lower production will fit well with this new reality in terms of consumption?
Well, I think that the answer is probably the same, in that having a closer alignment in between production and consumption certainly reduces the pressure on inventories in certain countries. I would say we should be sort of cautious about attributing consistency to the lower volumes of the last two vintages, because we know that there are strong climate effects there, and we know equally we can have strong climate effects in the other direction that might cause production to bounce back up again. And we have also, with the consumption side of things, we should also take into account that consumption in the last couple of years has been very affected by inflation. Yes, it's intersecting with other trends, but inflation is a key point. So again, we see inflation easing off, so that may also affect consumption.
Still regarding consumption, another question asking, for decreasing in consumption, can products with a lower alcohol content, more fruity flavors, perhaps with the addition of carbon dioxide, help or hinder?
I would say it depends very much on the market and the consumers that are being targeted with those products.
Anyone from the floor would like to ask a question? Do we have a journalist present? We can also make an exception if someone from a different institution would like to ask a question too. Well, if not, I will continue checking here the questions. This year, it seems climate is the main factor explaining the global drop in production. Do you see other factors that came into play?
Certainly, there will be other factors with countries and producers managing their stock levels. There will have been some decisions made by individual companies, perhaps not to produce so much or harvest so much. There may be some policy interventions as well. So yes, those things are in play, but really the main story for the last 2 years is these climate impacts.
The question directly also regarding this theme, climate change has impacted production. What the OIV is doing about it?
The OIV, I think we understand the impacts of climate change very clearly, and we see responses to climate change as being very much linked to sustainability as well. And responses to climate change, there's no one response. There are many responses because it's a very multifactorial effect. And so we have a wide range of aspects, everything from principles of sustainability to running courses about water management in arid conditions. We're focusing on soil health. We're focusing on soil CO2 sequestration. There's a wide range of things that we are doing that are all relevant to climate change, and we're going to continue that very strongly in our strategic plan.
Any other question coming from the floor? Yes. Excuse me, we're going to in you after, okay? Yes, please.
allwinestories.com from Greece. I would like to ask you, do you think that the production of the low alcohol wines will reduce the consumption?
I think it's very difficult to speculate about that because the consumption of low alcohol wines and the production of these products is very, very low at the moment.
Again, Per Carlson from BK Wine Magazine and Forbes.com. In your fascinating overview of the 100-year history, you divided the 100 years into different phases, the post-prohibition, the Second World War, the post-war. Is your feeling, and I guess it's very much a question of feeling and impression, is your feeling now, with the rather dramatic changes we're seeing in some ways, are we going into a new era now? Are we on the brink of something quite different, or is it just business as usual?
I don't know. I think it's very difficult to tell, and we have seen in the last couple of years a shift in consumption and a shift in production, but we know that the external factors like inflation and like climate change have had a big impact on that. So I think it's too soon to tell.
We have time for one more question. Anyone from the floor? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question on long-term planning. We looked at the back.
Excuse me, please present yourself.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Jacques Thébault, working with the Burgundy School of Business as head of the MBA program in wine and spirits business. I had a question about, we're looking at the past 100 years. Some companies have died in the past, like BlackBerry, not being able to look at very long-term trend ahead. How do you see looking at the next 30 or 50 years for the wine industry, and looking at the impact of climate change also?
I think looking at climate change, we have to expect that that's a long-term trend. We have to adapt to that and anticipate that there may be a degree of volatility. I think that's something that certainly needs to be planned for. I think in terms of other things like consumer preferences, it's very difficult to know what way the world will go. I think we as a sector always need to be open to learning from the new consumers, but we also should be conscious of the value of what we bring in terms of the heritage and the history and the connection to the land of the product that we have.
Thank you. We are now closing this part of questions and answers. I remind you that all the files, all the presentations here today are on the application and are going to be sent by email. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to send an email to press@oiv.int. And now, to conclude this first part of conferences, we are having the presentation of the new OIV strategic plan by our Director General.
Thank you once again, and I just want to conclude this conference because we talked about looking to the future with a few words on the OIV strategic plan for 2025 to 2029. The new OIV strategic plan is intended to position the OIV for its second century by prioritising the challenges and opportunities facing the sector and making sure that the OIV has the structures and processes in place to deliver on those priorities. Our priorities are very much informed by the key global challenges that come through in the data that we've been listening to just now. Climate change and sustainability, changing patterns of consumption, the question of wine and society, uncertainty in the global trading environment. Without doubt, this is a difficult moment for many in the wine and vine sector, as I said, but as we have seen, this is a highly resilient sector with a proven capacity to adapt and to find the opportunities that come with change. We know now that the vine and wine sector today makes better products and reaches more markets than ever in history, that it is a world leader in sustainability, that it is backed by a strong and dynamic scientific community, that it is a treasured cultural asset, and that it has the capacity to innovate and reach new consumers. The key is to work together to progress the interests that all vine and wine countries share in facing these challenges and exploiting the opportunities that arise. So what can the OIV do? First of all, I want to reflect that it is a great asset for the sector to have an organisation that can engage at the intergovernmental level. And I take great heart from the declaration that was made by the ministers of 37 member countries in October this year, which clearly shows that they understand the stakes for the sector and they wish to reinforce the OIV as the international reference for vine and wine. This gives the OIV extraordinary momentum for the coming years. During the OIV General Assembly, a few days after the ministerial conference, the OIV's new strategic plan was approved and it established a vision for the OIV to stand as an essential global reference for the vine and wine sector. In this plan, 6 priorities were agreed for the scientific and technical works of the OIV, shaped around the challenges and opportunities facing the sector today. The first priority is to coordinate global approaches to sustainability. Sustainability, that is, in all of its elements, environmental, economic, and social. The OIV has been active on sustainability for more than 20 years, and the power of the OIV lies in its capacity to promote a coordinated approach to sustainability across members and across the sector. The OIV can bring together the big picture of sustainability in the sector. It can establish benchmarks and definitions, share information and best practices, and promote coherence between different rules and requirements. The second priority is resilient and sustainable viticulture, supporting adaptation in the face of climate change and shifting market demand. We will bring members together on methodologies to measure and monitor the impacts of climate change, on evaluating strategies and recommending best practices. We will look at the threat from pests and diseases that are becoming more prevalent due to the changing climate, as well as the preservation of the rich genetic heritage of the grapevine, which is a great asset for future adaptation. The third priority is adapting enology to the future. This is perhaps the most historic function and strength of the OIV, its work on enology, production practices, and methods of analysis. This is a key point where the OIV engages directly with technical innovation, with product identity, and with questions of authenticity. OIV works are referenced in the regulations of many countries and in the recommendations of other intergovernmental organisations. The strategic priority for the OIV will be to reinforce this crucial function and ensure that the sector can adapt to the future with its demands on quality, sustainability, and product development. The fourth priority is to support all vitivinicultural products. We are responding to the request from members to increase our focus on table grapes and raisins, juices, spirituous beverages, and no and low alcohol products, with a strategic emphasis on developing a complete suite of OIV recommendations for these major product categories. The fifth priority is to simplify international trade. At a time of uncertainty in global markets, the OIV must take the opportunity to bring countries together on the scientific and technical aspects of trade, to inform stakeholders with global data, to share information, and to facilitate trade with recommendations, guidance, and standards. The sixth priority is to contribute to consumer safety and inform perspectives on wine, vine, and society. The OIV recognises the serious health impacts of harmful consumption of alcoholic beverages. It takes an evidence-based approach to questions of health and nutrition, gathering data and sharing objective and up-to-date scientific information. The OIV is also tasked with considering the wider contexts of consumption, economic, social, and cultural. This is a new theme that the OIV has been developing in recent years, bringing the social sciences more strongly into the OIV's scientific works. For me, the cultural aspects resonate strongly. I believe that the OIV can and should promote an inclusive global concept of vine and wine culture. Each country here today shares something from and contributes something to the culture of vine and wine. This is part of the richness of our sector. It is part of what links our countries together and part of what attracts people to our products. These are the directions that we're proposing for the OIV as we approach the end of one century and the beginning of another. This is how we will take our legacy of science and cooperation forward into the future. With the declaration of the ministers to give us momentum, with this magnificent Hotel Bouchou d'Esterno as the new home of vine and wine, and with our new strategic plan, we're ready to go. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a very fruitful celebration of the OIV's 100 years.
Thank you so much, Director General and Giorgio, for the presentations. We are ending now this first part of conferences. And for the second part, I will give the floor to the Director of External Relations of the OIV, Mrs. Sophie Pallas.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As you know, the 29th of November is the closure day of the centenary year of the OIV. But this is also a beginning. Actually, we don't still know if it is a new era for the wine world, but we can say that for the OIV, it is a new page of the history with the election 1 month ago of a new president, the first OIV president coming from the African continent. I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce Madame Mrs. Yvette van den Werf, President of the OIV. Mrs. van den Werf, you are an economist dedicated to the wine sector for 30 years. In your country, in South Africa, you are the director of the South African wine industry system, and you are in charge of the wine certification and statistics management of the South African sector. You had a great contribution for the development of South African wine industry by implementing new business intelligence system and integrating new technologies. Your contribution has been important also within the OIV. You have held key positions in the OIV's scientific groups since 2013. You were previously president of the Commission Economy and Law. We are particularly happy to hear you today, since this is the first speech of your presidency after your election last October in Dijon. Thank you very much for sharing your views as regards the global wine and wine sector, and also to give us an overview of the International Year on Vine and Wine. It's to you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for that introduction. Distinguished guests, esteemed members of the OIV, representatives from the wine and wine sector, and colleagues from around the world. As we come together to mark the conclusion of the OIV Centenary celebrations, it is hard not to feel a deep sense of pride and gratitude for the remarkable 100 years ago, 8 visionary founders established the foundation of an organization dedicated to uniting the world through vine and wine. Born from the deep crisis of the 1920s, marked by the devastation of phylloxera and a resulting production collapse, these 8 wine-producing nations came together to define a framework for recovery. What started as a bold and perhaps idealistic endeavor has grown into a global alliance of 51 member countries. This expansion represents not only growth in numbers, but is also a testament to the enduring power of unity and collaboration. Today, we owe our successes to the countless individuals whose insights, passion, and perseverance have shaped and strengthened the OIV's legacy. The story of the OIV is interwoven with the story of our world. Over the last century, we have navigated the challenges of war, economic crises, and societal change. We have also celebrated triumphs, scientific discoveries, the development of global markets, and the flourishing of wine culture in all its diversity. Through it all, the OIV has stood as a beacon of knowledge, resilience, and connection. We have witnessed a vast array of transformations. Advances in technology and science have revolutionized how we work with the vine, from precision viticulture to sustainable practices that honor the land we depend on. These tools, unimaginable to our founders, have enabled us to confront challenges like never before. And yet, the challenges we face today are no less daunting. Climate change has disrupted traditional winemaking regions, demanding not only resilience, but also innovation. Our industry must adapt, experimenting with grape varieties, rethinking our methods, and most importantly, committing to sustainability in every sense of the word. As we seize these opportunities, let us also remember that the significance of wine extends far beyond its commercial value. The OIV's role in preserving wine cultural significance is more essential than ever. Wine is not just a product. It is a cultural asset, a reflection of the land, the people, and the values it embodies. Protecting this heritage is our shared responsibility, one we must pass on to future generations. There's also a shift in how wine is perceived. Global wine consumption has declined, particularly among younger generations. Their interests and priorities often lie elsewhere, and we must ask ourselves, how do we bring them back to the table? This generation is driven by stories, values, and authenticity. Wine, with its unparalleled diversity and connection to culture and place, has so much to offer, but only if we tell this story in a way that resonates. Innovation, too, is reshaping our industry. Artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies are not just tools, but they are opportunities to enhance how we grow, produce, and share wine. Artificial intelligence is helping us monitor vineyards with precision, analyze market trends, and create personalized experiences for consumers. While these technologies hold great promise, they also challenge us to find harmony between innovation and tradition, ensuring we preserve the soul of wine amidst technological advances. So, what does the future hold for the OIV and the vine and wine industry? I believe it holds opportunity if we are brave enough to seize it. Opportunity to lead in sustainability, showing the world that wine can be a model of balance between nature and human creativity. Opportunity to innovate, blending technology with tradition to create a new chapter for wine. Opportunity to inspire, ensuring that every glass of wine tells a story that connects people across generations and cultures. We must also remain steadfast in our commitment to unity. The challenges we face, be they environmental, economic, or cultural, are too complex for one country to solve alone. Collaboration, the very principle on which the OIV was founded, is not just a value, it is a necessity. Through unity, we have achieved remarkable progress, and it is through unity that we will overcome future challenges. As we close this historic chapter, let us remind ourselves of the responsibility we carry. We are the custodians of a legacy that stretches back a century and the architects of a future that will define the next 100 years of Vine and Wine. Let us celebrate how far we have come and renew our dedication to the journey ahead. The OIV began with a vision of unity, and it is that same unity that will guide us through the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. Together, we will ensure that the culture of vine and wine continues to flourish, adapting and evolving while preserving essence. If we have a look at the overview of the International Year of Vine and Wine, the following has to be noted. So, as 2024 is a year of great significance for the OIV, celebrating 100 years of cooperation in science in vine and wine, the OIV declared 2024 the International Year of Vine and Wine. If we were to draw up an assessment of this International Year of Vine and Wine, 2024 reaffirmed the vital need for cooperation in the face of contemporary challenges. This was particularly well expressed at the two ministerial meetings held, one on 12 April in Italy and the other on 13 October in France, here in Dijon. The joint declaration of 13 October is a major historic milestone for the OIV and the vine and wine world. This declaration, endorsed by 37 countries, affirms the commitment of these countries to support the vine and wine sector, as well as the need to continue and intensify their scientific cooperation within the OIV's works. The International Year of Vines and Wine has been marked by exceptional events, such as these ministerial meetings, the World Vine and Wine Congress, and the inauguration of the OIV's remarkable new headquarters here in Dijon. It was also the occasion for numerous initiatives, both by the OIV and by certain member countries and cities, as will be shown in a few minutes with the International Network of Cities of Vine and Wine. In total, 30 wine competitions in 19 different countries were held under the International Year of Vine and Wine's patronage, with 47 symposiums in 14 different countries. Throughout the year, the OIV launched initiatives to highlight the importance of its scientific mission through high-level training seminars to disseminate knowledge, such as the immersive course on water and soil management and the online seminar on the new blockchain technologies applied to the wine sector. As part of its information mission, the OIV also sought to highlight the key role that resolutions have played in the development of the wine sector over the last century and demonstrated its strong presence on social networks with the 12 Months, 12 Resolutions series. This work of information and shedding light on the issues at stake in the OIV scientific work is very important. From the first definition of wine adopted in 1928 to the resolution adopted in October 2024 on wine labelling, not forgetting the definition of terroir and the selection of yeast for winemaking, it shows the extent to which the OIV's work is rooted in current issues and creates a frame of reference for governments. The launch of the OIV photo contest on the theme of global warming is also a fine initiative to celebrate this centenary. It shows that the vine is a highly inspirational subject and that arts can also be used to raise awareness of scientific issues. During these 100 years, there have been several milestones that have marked the history of the organization. One of them was the creation in 1987 of the International Network of Cities of Vine and Wine. More than 100 cities from 21 countries joined together to become centers for meetings and events related to the sector. In the centenary year, the OIV is relaunching this initiative, inviting cities that have hosted private and public events of a scientific and cultural nature, such as symposiums, workshops, OIV congresses, courses, and more, under the OIV's patronage of the centenary. This network will include both member cities from OIV member states and cities of non-member states, which are welcome to participate. For this centenary edition, one city reaffirmed their commitment, Yantai in China, and 8 new cities asked to join or have been invited to join the network. These cities are Santiago in Chile, Bordeaux in France, Dijon in France, Ensenada in Mexico, Punta del Este in Uruguay, Verona in Italy, Yantai in the Shandong province in China, Yanchang in the Ningxia region in China, and Zaragoza in Spain. For the centenary event at the OIV's new headquarters today, some of these cities will join in celebrating the organization's centenary by sharing their testimonials and congratulations. And in this regard, I'm going to give over to Sophie.
Let's watch the testimonies of the cities joining the international network of One in One City.
尊敬的约翰·巴克先生、女士们、先生们，在这个意义非凡的时刻，我谨代表中国宁夏银川市，向 OIV 成立100周年致以热烈祝贺。银川市宁夏贺龙山东路葡萄酒产区的核心区，得益于北纬38度、全球葡萄酒黄金产区大自然的恩赐，葡萄酒年产量7500万瓶，先后获得1200多个国际大奖。在 OIV 的支持和指导下，2023年6月，国际葡萄与葡萄酒产业大会在银川市成功举办，40多个国家的1000余名代表参加。今年，银川市加入国际葡萄与葡萄酒城市联盟，葡萄酒产业加速走向国际化、标准化、品牌化，为银川打造世界葡萄酒之都注入了强劲动力。100年历程继往开来，此次活动必将成为国际葡萄与葡萄酒产业新的里程碑。我们诚邀世界各地的朋友来到中国，走进宁夏，了解银川，携手并进，共创美好的未来。最后，衷心祝愿 OIV 100年纪念活动圆满成功。谢谢。
Soy Martín Laventure, director general de Turismo de Maldonado, y es un gusto realmente felicitar a la Organización Internacional de la Viña y el Vino por sus 100 años. Punta del Este, nuestra ciudad, tuvo el honor de ser sede de 2 congresos, en el año 1995 y en el año 2018. Y sin duda tenemos la intención y la vocación de ser sede de algún congreso más en los próximos 100 años. Así que felicitaciones a la Organización Internacional de la Viña y el Vino por estos 100 años de fecundo trabajo.
Un grande onore per la città di Verona essere stati inseriti dall'OIV in occasione del centenario nella rete delle città internazionali delle vigne e del vino. Per noi è un grande onore anche perché ospitiamo la più importante fiera del vino italiano, Vinitali, che ogni anno fa ritrovare qui a Verona le più grandi cantine produttrici d'Italia e in un incontro anche con operatori internazionali. Per noi è un grande onore anche perché nel 2008 abbiamo ospitato il 31esimo congresso dell'OIV internazionale e recentemente nel 2024 abbiamo ospitato anche il ministeriale con il ministro Lollobrigida e l'organizzazione. Per noi è una grande responsabilità ulteriore di promuovere questo grande prodotto dell'eccellente italiana che è ambasciatore in tutto il mondo del nostro paese.
Hello everyone， 我正站在中国烟台丁洛特酒庄之前。这座以 OIV 终身名誉主席罗伯特·丁洛特先生命名的酒庄，向 OIV 100年华诞致以热烈祝贺和诚挚祝福。1987年，烟台被授予国际葡萄与葡萄酒城称号，再到成为联盟创始成员单位，每一次携手并进，都见证了烟台产区的蓬勃发展。丁洛特先生11次到访烟台，距此不远呢，也有拉菲罗斯查尔德集团在亚洲投资的唯一酒庄。我们也在海外3大洲建有6家酒庄。在 OIV 的指导和支持下，烟台葡萄酒在国际舞台上屡获殊荣，成为连接东西方葡萄酒文化的桥梁。 祝愿 OIV 在新的100年里继续引领全球葡萄与葡萄酒事业再创佳绩。愿 OIV 与烟台就如这葡萄藤蔓，紧密相连，生生不息，共同书写葡萄酒事业的国际佳话。
At Wines of Chile, we probably recall the recent recognition of Santiago, Chile, as an OIV city awarded by the International Organization of Vine and Wine. This prestigious acknowledgement coincides with the centennial celebration of this esteemed organization. In December 2023, our capital city, Santiago, has the honor of hosting the International Ampelography course, marking its inaugural and closing events. This course brought together students from diverse nations, a testament to our city's growing influence in the world of viticulture. Notably, this was the first time the course was held in Latin America, highlighting Santiago's emergence as a hub of wine expertise. Ampelography has held special significance for Chile, and it's facilitated the rediscovery of the Carmener grape variety, thought to be extinct worldwide. 30 years have passed since the groundbreaking discovery, which has since then reshaped our wine industry. This achievement underscored the importance of international collaboration and expertise sharing. We look forward to continued partnerships fostering growth and innovation in the world of wine. Thank you, OIV and all its team.
En 2024, el Ayuntamiento de Zaragoza ha puesto en marcha el proyecto Zaragoza Capital Mundial de la Garnacha, con la voluntad de posicionar la ciudad como epicentro internacional de esta variedad, aprovechando la riqueza vitivinícola de la provincia y su variedad de uva autóctona, puesto que la garnacha nació en el siglo XII en Zaragoza y Aragón y después se extendió en todo el mundo. Las 3 denominaciones de origen de la provincia, Calatayud, Campo de Borja y Cariñena, son muestras de la increíble versatilidad y riqueza de la garnacha, y cada territorio nos ofrece vinos únicos con matices muy diferentes. En relación con este proyecto, la pertenencia de Zaragoza a la OIV resulta crucial para la ciudad por cuanto favorece e impulsa el reconocimiento y la promoción de su cultura vitivinícola. Además, formar parte de esta red representa para Zaragoza importantes beneficios en el reconocimiento internacional, el fomento del turismo, la colaboración con otras ciudades, el impulso a la sostenibilidad o también el impulso a la industria local. En resumen, la pertenencia de Zaragoza a la Organización Internacional del Vino representa para la ciudad un importante vehículo de desarrollo económico, cultural, sostenible, no solo para la industria local, sino para toda la comunidad en su conjunto. Estamos muy satisfechos y muy contentos de pertenecer a esta red.
Vous me posez la question de savoir qu'est-ce que l'OIV représente pour Dijon. Je voudrais vous dire qu'avec le transfert du siège de l'Organisation internationale de la vigne et du vin, qui a quitté Paris pour le cœur de notre ville, de notre cité, Dijon, qui est classée au patrimoine mondial de l'UNESCO, Dijon est devenue la véritable mondiale des Nations Unies de la vigne et du vin, sorte de barycentre. Mais Dijon devient également une ville diplomatique, puisqu'elle accueille pour la première fois une grande organisation internationale, ce qui lui permet de renouer ainsi avec sa grande et propre histoire. Cet enracinement de l'OIV dans l'écrin restauré de l'hôtel Bouchu dit d'Esterno, c'est la reconnaissance de notre action. Il marque une étape majeure dans notre stratégie de reconquête de l'identité d'une métropole, qui est en réalité profondément liée à la vigne et au vin. À tel point que Dijon Métropole mène aujourd'hui une reconquête de son propre vignoble disparu, avec déjà 60 premiers hectares d'AOC Bourgogne, Bourgogne-Dijon bien sûr, plantés, en identifiant et en confiant à des viticulteurs des terres en appellation d'origine contrôlée, non plantées ou dédiées jusque-là à d'autres cultures que la vigne. Ce qu'on appelait dans le temps le Dijonnois redevient un véritable vignoble de la ville, puissant symbole de cohésion nécessaire, indispensable même, entre le rural et l'urbain. La désignation de Dijon au sein du réseau international des villes de vigne et du vin dans le monde est un honneur qui nous engage et qui valorise ainsi toute la viticulture bourguignonne.
Thank you, Sophie. So today, 29 November, marks the end of the International Year of Vine and Wine. The tremendous momentum generated by this century must continue. The OIV must continue to expand the dialogue around vine and wine and lay the foundation for the next century. To this end, we could renew the celebration of vines and wine that has accompanied human societies for 8,000 years. We could reaffirm the importance of scientific cooperation for the constant progress of this sector. The growth of the OIV since its creation, on average 1 country every 2 years of over 100 years, clearly demonstrates that sharing knowledge is fundamental to the spread of viticulture throughout the world. The science and technique of vine and wine are part of a common heritage, shared and enriched at every moment in the 4 corners of the world. For all these reasons, it seems evident that the OIV, the world scientific reference of vine and wine, should mark the importance of vine and wine in our societies. On this day of 29 November 2024, exactly 100 years to the day after the signing of the founding treaty of the International Wine Office, it seems obvious that this is the day to mark this importance. As the new president of the OIV, it is an honor and a pleasure to propose 29 November as the International Day of Vine and Wine. This date will be submitted for approval at the next OIV General Assembly to be held in Moldova on 15 June 2025. So, as we bid farewell to this milestone year, I invite you all to reflect on our shared achievements, dream boldly for the future, and move forward as one. The story of vine and wine is still being written, and I'm confident that the OIV will continue to be its steadfast author.
Thank you very much, Mrs. President, for this important declaration. And I think now everyone can save in their calendar, as from now, 29th of November, the International Day of Vine and Wine. Thank you very much. Now we will proceed to the last part of the conference. Thank you very much again.
Hello once again, everyone. So now we're entering this exciting part of the presentation of the winners of the 2024 Centenary Photo Contest, Roca, which main theme was the vine and wine sector facing climate change. We received nearly 70 entries for this photo contest from more than 20 countries, submitted by both professional and amateur photographers. today we are then gathered to recognize the winning works that beautifully capture the essence of the wine sector in the context of one of these great challenges, that is climate change. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the OIV Vice President, Mr. Luigi Moio, who will share a few words with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Alors, je vais parler en français. Mesdames et messieurs, c'est un jour très spécial pour l'Organisation internationale de la vigne et du vin. Nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui dans le cadre de notre centenaire. On a écouté le discours de la présidente Yvette van der Merwe, qui aujourd'hui elle a proposé le jour international de la vigne et du vin pour célébrer la remise des prix, cette fois, du concours photo du centenaire de l'OIV. Une initiative qui illustre à la fois notre riche histoire et notre engagement face aux défis actuels et futurs du secteur vitivinicole. Ce concours ayant pour thème le secteur de la vigne et du vin face au changement climatique nous offre une occasion unique de réfléchir à travers l'art de la photographie sur la manière dont notre secteur relève l'un des plus grands défis de notre époque. Après 100 ans, on a un autre grand défi, le changement climatique. Et les images primées aujourd'hui vont bien au-delà de la simple esthétique. Elles sont le reflet des réalités et des espoirs d'une filière qui, grâce à l'innovation, au travail et à la résilience, s'adapte au changement tout en préservant son héritage pour les générations à venir. Aujourd'hui, en récompensant les lauréates, nous rendons hommage à leur talent artistique et à leur capacité à capturer l'essence de cette transformation. Leur regard nous inspire et nous rappelle que, bien que le changement climatique soit un défi colossal, il offre aussi une opportunité de réinventer, d'innover et de renforcer notre engagement en faveur de la durabilité. Je tiens à remercier chaleureusement tous les participants dont les œuvres ont enrichi ces projets et à féliciter tout particulièrement les lauréates dont les travaux nous ont profondément touchés et marqués. Ces photographies ne seront pas seulement mises en lumière lors de notre événement et dans notre publication. Elles resteront comme des témoignages puissants de la résilience et de la créativité du monde vitivinicole. Je souhaite également exprimer ma profonde gratitude au jury du concours de photos. Yann Joubin, historique directeur adjoint. Où il est? Ah, il est dans le bureau, il travaille. Il travaille tout le temps. Cher directeur général, il travaille. Christophe Deschanel, photographe professionnel. Benjamin Boin, mon ami professeur de viticulture à l'Université de la Bourgogne, il n'est pas là? Non. Expert de l'OIV, bien sûr, il était même président de la commission viticulture, et Ricardo Fernández Nuñez, fondateur de Vinos de la Loi, qui effectivement, il m'avait écrit après la disparition de Pau Roca, l'ancien directeur, il avait écrit tout de suite et il avait proposé de donner, de soutenir une bourse de recherche. Mais je pense que l'idée de faire ce concours, c'était encore mieux d'une bourse. Et c'est un généreux sponsor de ce concours qui nous a fait l'honneur d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Et votre soutien, Ricardo, il est essentiel pour la réussite de cette initiative. Et nous vous remercions chaleureusement. Enfin, je voudrais prendre un moment pour rendre hommage encore une fois. On a fait beaucoup de choses pour Pau Roca, mais c'est toujours pour moi important de le rappeler, notre directeur et notre ancien directeur général. Ce concours était réalisé en sa mémoire pour saluer son engagement inlassable en faveur de la lutte contre le changement climatique durant son mandat à la tête de l'OIV. Pau, il était un visionnaire et un ardent défenseur de la durabilité dans le secteur vitivinicole. Et son héritage continue d'inspirer notre action. Et ce concours, il est dédié complètement à lui. Félicitations aux lauréats et merci à tous les présents pour leur engagement et leur soutien. Continuons à travailler ensemble pour faire rayonner la vigne et le vin dans le monde entier. Merci à tous.
Thank you, Luigi, for your inspiring words. As you mentioned, Ricardo Nuñez Fernández is the founder of Vinos de la Luz and the sponsor of this contest. And we have the honor to give him the floor now.
Thank you very much. Really, I will not read my speech because I want to show you my emotions. May I speak in Spanish? Posso parlare italiano, Luigi? Español o italiano? Buenas tardes a todos. Para mí es un gran honor estar aquí, de este lado. Soy un hombre del vino, soy productor de vino y he venido a la OIV como sponsor de un concurso de fotografía para rendir homenaje a Pau Roca. El testimonio que dejó Pau Roca de sus convicciones frente al cambio climático es parte de su herencia. El mundo sufre por el cambio climático, los productores sufrimos por el cambio climático y el vino está sufriendo mucho por el cambio climático. Los pueblos se inundan, veamos España. Los pueblos se secan, veamos España. Veamos también que están plantando viñas en Suecia porque en el continente el calor destroza las viñas. Veamos que la Unión Europea ha extendido los plazos de plantación para aquellos que tenemos derecho a plantar porque nos pide que plantemos, nos permite plantar si hemos tenido severas sequías o precipitaciones agudas. Estos dos extremos los estamos viviendo. Y Pau era un guerrero contra la obra del hombre en el clima. Una vez me dijo, el peor enemigo del ser humano es otro ser humano. El peor enemigo del cambio climático, el peor enemigo tiene que ser hacer las cosas bien, volver a la regularidad, ser cuidadosos, porque el mundo que estamos dejando es un mundo irregular, de picos. El mundo que nos mostraron hoy estadísticamente es un mundo que es igual al de 1924, hace 100 años. No puede ser que hayamos retrocedido como seres humanos y como productores. Tenemos que luchar todos juntos para que el cambio climático vuelva a ser una cosa natural y normal. Pau Roca fue un gran dirigente, un gran padre, gran esposo y un gran amigo. Nos enseñó muchas cosas cuando era director general de la Federación Española del Vino y nos enseñó muchísimas cosas como director general de la OIV. Gracias a él, hoy un hombre del vino, que ese es el lenguaje que nos une, el vino, viene aquí a dar los testimonios a aquellos artistas que a través de la lente ven lo que sucede o lo que puede suceder con el cambio climático. Quiero agradecer, en primer lugar, a quienes han hecho posible que nuestra organización productora de vinos sea sponsor de este concurso. Quiero agradecer realmente a Luigi Moio, que nos dijo sí desde el primer momento a la idea, a John Barker, que nos dijo sí a la idea, y también al espectacular, al magnífico staff de la OIV, que han trabajado y trabajan en beneficio del mundo del vino. En beneficio del mundo del vino, como diría una escritora, la primera enóloga española, trabajan para el mundo del vino de la cepa a la copa. Eso es OIV, el arco de trabajo, una gran biblioteca de científicos que nos enseñan de todo. Nadie puede ignorar lo que dice la OIV si la OIV está clamando por tomar alguna medida por el cambio climático. Yo he conocido presidentas como Claudia de Argentina, Mónica de Alemania, Regina de Brasil, hoy Yvette de Sudáfrica, y un presidente como Luigi Moio, y todos han tenido conciencia de que había que actuar respecto de qué vamos a hacer con la destrucción del mundo que estamos llevando a cabo. Mucha gente vive del vino. Mucha gente vive por el vino. Pero también muchos están destrozando el mundo y dentro del mundo está el mundo del vino. Gracias al staff de OIV que nos permiten estar sentados de este lado. Nosotros tenemos un gran privilegio, todos los que estamos aquí. Todos estamos el día del centenario de la OIV. Esto no les pasó nunca a ustedes ni a mí. Somos testigos de la celebración del centenario de OIV como si fuéramos amigos de toda la vida. Estamos juntos en esta sala como un gran privilegio. Un privilegio nostálgico también porque estamos honrando la memoria de Pau Roca. También la alegría del centenario y también el homenaje a los artistas que nos han acompañado y que han concursado. Gracias a todos. De nuevo, staff OIV. Gracias Sofía, gracias Solange, gracias Daniela, gracias mi querida Camila, también argentina como yo, y gracias a Giorgio, a todos. No quiero nombrar porque uno es ingrato y no hace justicia si no nombra a todos, pero todos y cada uno están luchando para que este mundo cambie, desde su lugar en el vino. y los tenemos que apoyar. OIV es nuestra casa grande, la casa de los hombres del vino. Sin OIV, el vino no sería lo mismo. Con OIV, el mundo puede ser mejor. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ricardo. Thank you so much for your words. And now, let's go to the awaited moments, the presentation of our winners. We will start with a special mention awarded to the picture Flooded Vineyards in Bourgogne by Per Carlson. This striking photograph captures Cabernet Franc vines in Bourgogne, standing with their roots submerged in water after heavy rainfall caused flooding in the vineyard. The image poignantly highlights the growing challenges of extreme weather events and their impact on viticulture. So our Vice President Luigi will give the diploma to Per Carlson. You may come, please.
Luigi. Ricardo was here. No. Thank you.
Yes, a big thank you for this honor. And coming back to Mr. Nuñez's words about flooding, we have seen much worse this year, as you mentioned. I'm very honored to be here in memory of Paolo Roca, who I used to know. I think I have a particular thank you also for putting in spotlight photography and sustainability, climate change, things that are very close to my heart, to our hearts, both of us, me and my wife who work together. I feel particularly honored, and I'm not saying this to flatter you too much, actually, maybe a little bit. I feel particularly honored to receive this from what I think is the world's most important wine organization. I really do think it is, even though it works very much behind the scenes. This event made me think a little bit about wine and about photography. And I think that I see a lot of links between the two, a lot of similarities between the two, actually. They're intimately linked in many ways. Actually, it was with photography I initially started to discover wines 50 or so years ago. But both photography and wine is creating emotions. It's about sometimes being inspired by wine, being inspired by photography, or engaging creativity quite often. It is also, and maybe even more importantly, it's a link between people. It's something that may make people meet. It is, or they are, wine and photography, culture and civilization. This is also what we try and convey in our books, as Mr. Moio just pointed out a minute ago. So thank you very much for this honor. I'm very proud to be here today.
We now move to the third prize. the awarded photo Vine Leaf in Ice by Christophe Der. This photo is an artistic depiction of the effects of climate change. This photograph illustrates how premature grapevine development makes the plant vulnerable to late frosts, capturing the intersection of art and environmental awareness. So, please, Christophe Der.
Je remercie, je suis flatté et honoré de recevoir ce prix. Le sujet était très intéressant et indispensable. Et donc, je tenais à remercier les organisateurs, l'OIV et le sponsor. Je répète, non, non, je voulais remercier les organisateurs, l'OIV et le sponsor, Vinos de la Luz. Merci beaucoup.
So next, we proceed with the second prize, the awarded photo called Global Warming by Michel Joly. This compelling image portrays vigneron Jean repairing stakes in his vineyards at Savigny-les-Beaunes, France, taken under unseasonably intense sunshine. The scene reflects the increasing challenges posed by extreme weather conditions. Oh, I'm sorry, too fast. And I please call Michel Joly to come to receive his diploma.
Je parlais en français, moi. Écoutez, et je voudrais dire un grand merci à l'organisation. Remercier également les membres du jury pour avoir sélectionné ma photo. Et puis aussi, bien sûr, le sponsor Vinos de la Luz, je ne sais pas si je prononce bien, mais voilà, pour le prix correspondant à ce concours, en fait, il va me permettre de financer un projet, au moins partiellement, que j'ai pour faire des tirages photo alternatifs. Concrètement, je vais acheter une presse pour faire des estampes photographiques. Mais bon, c'est une autre aventure. Pour vous parler brièvement de cette photo, déjà, elle n'a pas été faite très loin d'ici, puisque c'est à Savigny-les-Beaunes, en Bourgogne. Et c'était une journée d'hiver, effectivement, où la température était très élevée pour la saison, ce qui arrive malheureusement de plus en plus souvent, avec un soleil très présent. Donc, voilà. Mais ce n'est pas une photo que j'ai faite comme ça, par hasard, en passant dans les vignes. Elle est issue, en fait, d'un gros travail que j'ai fait durant toute l'année 2022 et que je continue aussi à faire, mais un gros travail sur le dérèglement climatique vu par les viticulteurs. Donc un travail à hauteur d'homme où j'ai suivi vraiment plusieurs vignerons, où je les ai interviewés pour avoir un petit peu leur ressenti par rapport à l'avenir de leur métier, pour parler un petit peu de l'adaptation de la culture, et que ce soit dans les vignes ou que ce soit dans les wineries. Voilà, et tout ce travail a abouti en fait déjà à un petit film photographique avec les vignerons qui est exposé, qui parlait de tout ça, mais aussi à une expo une expo photo donc, qui a été présentée dans différents festivals photo en 2023, qui en 2024, durant l'été 2024, a été présentée à la Cité des climats et des vins de Bourgogne à Beaune, et qui, à partir de mars 2025, sera présentée à la Cité du vin de Bordeaux. Voilà, donc tout ça pour vous dire que c'est un sujet qui me tient à cœur et je suis vraiment très, très heureux d'être là. Et cette photo, en fait, a été au dernier moment, a été écartée de la sélection finale. Et je suis encore plus heureux voilà, qu'elle ait une seconde vie et qu'elle se retrouve ici à l'OIV. Voilà, merci à tous et bon anniversaire.
Merci. And now the last but not the least, obviously, the first prize that went to De Blur by Christian Kielmeyer. This picture was captured during a sunset in the wine region of Somló, Hungary. This photograph just opposes the stillness and motion of a single vine leaf. According to the photographer, it symbolizes the planet's breathtaking beauty while highlighting its delicate fragility. The awarded is not present here today. He sent us a video message.
Hello, my name is Christian Kielmeyer. Sorry that I cannot be in person at the event, but I would love to share a few thoughts about this picture. I was visiting a winemaker in Somló since I'm involved in a book project on the natural wines. And while the winemaker was preparing the wines for the tasting, I was wandering off into the vineyards. And I saw this still image of this wine and the sun setting in the background. And I wanted to capture this very moment with handheld, so no tripod, or high shutter speed, with a macro lens 105mm, just to give you a few technical data on it. And while I was capturing this still image, it kind of reminded me that how beautiful our planet is, that how beautiful the planet is, but also how fragile, and we have to be protected and take care of it. And to capturing this moment is very important in general. So I would like to thank you for awarding me the first prize. And yeah, it was a great honor and pleasure. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye.
We are almost ending our conference afternoon. And before ending, let's give the floor again to our Vice President, Mr. Luigi Moio.
Thank you. Ouais. Alors, bon, je présente une autre fois cet évangile d'Humo. Cette fois, je l'écris. C'est la première fois que je l'écris. Alors, comme je l'ai dit à plusieurs reprises, l'idée de ces vins était belle. Et c'est une autre idée que j'avais partagée avec Yann. Tout de suite, j'ai dit quand j'étais élu présidente, je suis allé à l'OIV à Paris et il y avait déjà 2 bouteilles qui fêtaient l'OIV. C'était un bouteille, il avait sur l'étiquette, il est écrit Pasteur. Moi, je suis un prof d'énologie, et donc la chimie et la microbiologie, c'est tous pour nous. Et donc, je dis, voilà, Pasteur, là. Elle était donnée à l'OIV, ça fait une trentaine d'années, non? Oui. Et donc, il y avait une autre bouteille, et j'avais proposé à Yann, et à l'époque, l'ancien directeur à Roca, bon, il faut faire le vin pour fêter l'OIV. Et donc, c'était belle, cette idée, mais pas facile. Belle parce que, pour moi, c'était la meilleure façon de marquer le prestigieux centenaire de l'Organisation internationale de la vigne et du vin. Pas facile parce qu'on doit faire, il fallait faire le vin de tout le monde, un vin pour tous, pas un vin néo-zélandais, pas un vin sud-africain, pas un vin italien, français, brésilien, argentin, etc. Et donc un vin universel, c'était la chose plus compliquée. Cela, c'était possible parce qu'on l'a lié à Pasteur. En effet, il était obtenu à partir des grappes de pinot noir récoltées dans un vignoble appartenant à la famille Boissé, que je remercie pour le soutien et pour avoir accepté ce projet compliqué et long. À côté de celui où Pasteur il a récolté les grappes pour ses études, Arbois. Pasteur est universel. C'est un bénéfacteur de l'humanité. Hein? Et la chose incroyable, que dans les études qu'il a commencées, les études sont parties sur le vin, mais d'abord au niveau chimique et après microbiologique. Et il est parti du vin et progressivement il est passé de la chimique à les molécules du vivant. Ça, c'est un argument que je suis plus président, je me dédie maintenant à rédiger mon livre, mon deuxième livre, et là, je vais expliquer tout ça. C'est quelque chose de surprenant, incroyable. La chance de le vin. Et donc, il est passé du non-vivant au vivant. Et le vin, c'est la vie. C'est vivant, le vin. C'est la vie. Et comme toutes les choses qui vivent, le vin, il change continuellement. Quand avec Yann, je discutais, il faut faire un vin qui va durer au moins 50 années. Hein? C'est les 50 années ici à l'Hôtel Boucheron. Et donc, c'est un vin projeté pourquoi il puisse changer doucement pendant la vie. Et donc, chaque fois qu'on le goûte, on va voir des choses différentes, comme il change. Et c'est joli. Donc, j'invite de les goûter maintenant. Ça fait 2-3 mois, non, 2 mois que je goûte, 1 mois. Et chaque fois, pour moi, qu'il se débouche une de ces bouteilles, on célèbre l'OIV. On célèbre le vin. Et surtout son universalité. Mais non pas parce que le vin, il est partout dans le monde, il est bu partout dans le monde. Parce que ça, malheureusement, ce n'est pas vrai. Pas tous les pays on boit le vin. Mais parce que le vin, il a apporté une contribution décisive au progrès des connaissances scientifiques fondamentales pour l'humanité. Personne, c'est vrai ce que je dis. C'est vrai, parce que c'est une histoire passionnante, scientifique, et je cite que d'où Lavoisier et Pasteur. Lavoisier, il fonde la chimique étudiant la fermentation alcoolique. Et il va à définir le principe de conservation des masses dans sa réaction chimique sous la fermentation alcoolique, c'est-à-dire une molécule de sucre qui donne 2 molécules d'alcool éthylique et 2 molécules d'anhydride carbonique. Après, il y a Pasteur. Il y a Pasteur qu'avec le vin, il découvre les bases moléculaires de la biologie et de la vie. Okay? Et donc, le vin, avec son fermentation alcoolique, étonnamment, s'est retrouvé dans le centre de cette étude. L'OIV, c'est la référence scientifique mondiale, et donc, justement, ça, c'est le vin du Centenary. Et donc, allez-nous ensemble à boire aux 100 prochaines années de l'OIV avec la cuvée du Centenary. Merci.
We are now giving the floor to the Director General, Mr. John Baca.
Thank you, Luigi. I just wanted to say a few words to finish off today's conference. It's been a very rich conference and I think full of importance and full of meaning for the OIV, for me personally, and we're really thrilled that so many of you have been able to come here and share your time with us in the OIV. I want to congratulate the winners of the photo competition and also to thank Ricardo Nuñez, a great friend of the OIV for his generosity in commemorating the memory of my predecessor, Pau Roca. Thank you also to Madam Yvette van der Merwe, the President, Vice President Luigi Moio, the experts who've come here from the OIV, because the experts are really the lifeblood of our work in the organisation, and also the representatives of our member states, the people who've come here from the Burgundy community and from around France and even from around the world. Thank you particularly to the representation from Italy and from Greece and from China, of course, as well. And particularly, I'd like to acknowledge our friend, Mr. Howlin Hai from Ningxia, who's a winner of the OIV Merit and a great friend of the OIV also. It's really, we're kind of coming to the end of the 100 years. I'll give a little bit of a speech later, but just to reflect on the fact that we have really achieved a lot as an organisation, but the whole purpose of this celebration, the celebrations we've had this year, of course, it's to remember where we've come from, but it's also to look forward to the future, and we look forward to a really strong future in the OIV. So thank you once again, and we're going to have a glass of wine here, the wonderful Centenary wine, which Luigi which has been made under Luigi's very careful, very skillful management, and I'm sure that you will enjoy that and appreciate a little bit of this wonderful product that brings us all together. So thank you.
We are now concluding. I just ask your attention for some technical information that our colleague Solange Slack is going to share with us.
Just some minor words to say thank you very much for joining wherever you were based around the world, because we are hybrids. You can find all the relevant documents that has been shared on the OIV app. And in the following days, the replay will also be available. For any question for the press, you can reach us through Daniela Costa. For the statistics, Giorgio Delgrosso. And any further question, we are always here. So now the International Year of Vine and Wine has officially ended, but I invite you here in the auditorium to join us for the more festive parts through the staircase behind you. And I want to thank you all. See you soon for the next event in 2025, and all the best from the OIV.